It's a Monday Ask LOJ edition. We got a little delayed. What is it like inside of an NBA draft room, and what should the Jazz strategy be? Are two of the best of an awesome set of Ask LOJ questions, and it's all coming up next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 bum. Pow, pow. Why is that not playing?
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
How are you? I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. On today's edition of Locked on Jazz, it is what is usually our Friday edition of Ask LOJ, but it is coming to you on a Monday because I'll explain in just a minute. But great questions coming in. We will check in on what is it like to be in an NBA draft room. I'll share the experience I've had the one time I've done that. Kobe Buffkin, if we love him as much as I do you go 9 or do you go 16? What's the Jazz strategy around 9 and 16? What area should the Jazz make moves? What does it cost to get a first round pick? What about Chris Paul? All of those conversations coming up on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. As I mentioned, I'm David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider, and this is your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Big shout out to the everydayers who join us each and every day, and thank you very much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free. We are available on all podcasting apps, free on YouTube. Great conversation that goes on in the chat room as well. So thank you very much for being a part of the show. Today's show is brought to you in part by, where's my little notes? Brought to you in part by Prize Picks. Oh, that's fun. Prize Picks, today's episode brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users receive 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. PrizePicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. I owe you an explanation. I'd say an apology, but one thing I hate in life is people who apologize who aren't sorry, and I, in this case, am not particularly sorry. So here's what happened. So my hope was to get the show out Friday. My daughter was in the finals of the Utah Junior State Am, and they teed off at 7:30 in the morning. And so I was like, all right, well, I'll just get it done later in the day. But then, fortunate for us, the day became a celebration as she had a wonderful match against one of her best friends. And it never happened. And then, do you know how old I am? Then I left town to go to, are you ready for this? My 35th high school reunion. Great time. These were the best people in my life. But yeah, I'm really, really old. If you're like, some of you aren't 35. Most of you might not be 35. Some of you have been listening to me for 35 years. Not quite, not totally possible, but close. Probably maybe 30 years. So anyway, I went back for my 35th high school reunion, which meant I did not get the show out Saturday or Sunday. So that's my explanation, not an apology, because I hate it when people say they're sorry and they're not. Just a personal issue. All right. But the questions were great that came in, and I knew what the show was going to be. And I was like, today, I got this morning, I was like, you know, my show's better today if I use those questions than if I come up with all the stuff I have. And we'll be able to push back. John Hollinger did something interesting on free agency. We'll do that tomorrow. NBA mock drafts have been really, really quiet. So I'm assuming they're going to come out all week long, and we'll be talking about them all week long, which will be great. So that's the plan for the week. And then I leave on Thursday for an extended period of time and taking my daughter on a graduation trip. And so Leaf Tulane takes over on Friday of this week. All right, let's get to it. And get the questions in. Some great stuff. You guys are always so good at this. I'm really appreciative. Let's get to the first question of the day. And this was a really interesting question, and I have been fortunate once in my lifetime to be able to do this. So Derek Orr, tip of the hat. What is an NBA draft room like? How well do teams know what others want to do? So I will share two stories here. So I was in the Seattle Supersonics draft room the year they drafted Mo Sene. And then I've, over the years, if anybody, I don't know if people remember this, but in my early part of my career, I was kind of the Woj of the draft. like I was breaking stories, getting insight. This was before kind of I'd break them in Salt Lake or Seattle and no one would ever know I broke them. I mean, maybe Hoop Site, but that was about it. So the time I was in the draft was the Seattle Supersonics 2006 NBA draft room. So that's a really kind of murky draft. It's Andrea Bargnani was the first pick, LaMarcus Aldridge was the second, Adam Morrison was the third, Tyrus Thomas was the fourth, and Sheldon Williams the fifth. I mean, it's really one of the worst. And Brandon Roy went sixth, who turned out to be great, but had a major knee problem everyone knew about, and then he only lasted 6 years in the NBA. It's one of the worst all-time drafts. Randy Foye, 7. Rudy Gay was 8. He's probably the best player ever out of that draft. The Sonics drafted Mo Sene, which was weird because it was like their third straight center they had drafted in 47 games. The Jazz had, I think, their eyes on hoping Brandon Roy could slip because of his knee injury or Randy Foye or Rudy Gay, the Sonics. And they became aware during the day that they weren't going to get there. And the fascinating part of this to me was that they then were kind of reviewing players' talent. And I won't say the player, but one of my favorite moments is they were watching a player. And Wally Walker, hopefully doesn't mind me telling the story, he's the GM of the team. And he literally screams at the television, "Do something I like. Do something I like." Like they, I think, knew that the draft fell off at 8 or might have even been questionable at 8. And were just trying to find a player that they liked at that point, which was a super interesting kind of place to be and watch them go through at that point. It was, and so to answer your question, do they know? Yes, they knew who was going where. And they reacted as such, and then they made a mistake, obviously drafting Mo Sene. JJ Redick went next, and Thabo Sefolosha was a decent player. It was really a bad draft. And so this was a super interesting, like Rajon Rondo and Kyle Lowry went 21 and 24, two of the better players in that draft, but super bad draft, one of the all-time worst drafts. And it was really interesting. They knew the way the draft was playing, and they knew they were in trouble at 10, that there wasn't talent. And so they took a flyer on Mo Sene, kind of knowing that every other player around them at that point was not particularly good. And they missed. But frankly, Hilton Armstrong went next. He wasn't very good. Or 2 picks later, Cedric Simmons went. Ronnie Brewer was the Jazz pick, which was probably a better pick than most, and he was only okay. It's a really funky draft. I don't think no player in the history of that draft ever averaged 20 points, other than LaMarcus. There's limited all-stars, and LaMarcus, Brandon Roy, Rudy Gay, Kyle Lowry are probably the 4 best players in that draft, and then Paul Millsap was a second-round pick. So anyway, yes. The other one that I'm pretty well aware, was pretty well versed on, is a Jazz draft, in which the year the Jazz drafted Trey Burke, they had done a bunch of analysis, at least some of them had, in which they really didn't think any of the point guards in that draft would turn into point guards. So it was a very center heavy, very point guard heavy draft. So the point guards were Trey Burke, CJ McCollum, who turned into a 2 guard, not a 1. Michael Carter Williams, who never turned out, but he won Rookie of the Year, which kind of tells you about this draft. It's interesting. Dennis Schroeder, who's lasted the longest. Shane Larkin was a player in that draft. And there was one other. This is the Rudy Gobert draft by the Jazz, where they go get Rudy Gobert at 27. What's interesting about this draft, the Jazz had really, when the night started, if I remember correctly, the Jazz had 14 and 21. And the Jazz, if my sources were correct, the plan that night was to draft Kelly Olynyk at 14 and Rudy Gobert at 21. And then word got out that Boston was trading ahead of the Jazz to get Kelly Olynyk. And it sent the Jazz into a little bit of just kind of, I don't know what the right word is. Action, I guess, is the word. They went into action. You could say panic, but I don't think that they... And so that's when the Jazz then traded the 14th pick and the 21st pick in the draft to move up to 9 and they end up taking Trey Burke, which might have been a little bit of a stretch for where they planned to be. They kind of had known Trey wasn't going to be on the board, but they really wanted Kelly Olynyk. And at 14, ironically, they didn't, and they couldn't get Giannis's medical records, is my memory on this draft. There's a lot of pieces to this puzzle. So, it's just kind of like, and so they trade up to get Trey Burke, which was the best of the group, there was going to be a point guard, like, of that group. And I think I probably misspoke at the beginning to say, like, their analysis was, like, I don't know, like, that there was there wasn't going to be, like, a bona fide star. We needed a point guard. And so you were kind of set of staying, there isn't going to be a bona fide star, so we're set. We're going to go 14. We're going to go 21. We're going to go Kelly Olynyk. We're going to go Rudy Gobert. And then the trade. So then you go up to go get Trey Burke because he's the best of the point guards. And they managed this draft. This is a great example of, like, how you manage draft perfectly. So the Jazz used their 14th pick and their 21st to move up to 9. They go get Trey Burke. Kind of, didn't pan out brilliantly, but again, no point guard did in that draft. But they also clearly knew that they'd be able to buy back into the draft to get Rudy Gobert at 27, right? So they end up being able to go grab Trey Burke at 9, who wouldn't have gotten to 14. They weren't going to get Olynyk, so their next choice was Trey Burke. And then they manage it perfectly on the backside by going to get Rudy Gobert. So those are two examples of where I was pretty well versed in what's going on. I don't think I characterized the first part of that right. Let's try to say is like there wasn't a point guard that was like dead set on being a stud. So they were set with taking Kelly Olynyk at 14, believing he was going to have a long-time career, be nice. And then Rudy Gobert at 21, when they suddenly aren't going to get Olynyk, then their next choice is to go get Trey Burke. You have to make picks, right? You can't just say, oh, well, I don't have anybody I think is going to be a star. And that draft was really funky too, right? Otto Porter, kind of an okay 3rd pick. Cody Zeller, probably not a great 4th pick. Alex Len, not a great 5th pick. Nerlens Noel, not a great 6th pick. Ben McLemore, not a 7th pick. Like, that's a pretty funky draft. So and Anthony Bennett's the 1. So this is interesting. These two drafts I'm talking about are both drafts in which you really had pretty poor drafts. Guys weren't going to pan out. And the Jazz, to get Rudy Gobert in that draft's a huge win. And frankly, Trey Burke, it's a relative win for his draft position there. And from the Sonic standpoint in that draft, obviously Mo Sende's a bust, but there wasn't really another guy that was going to come through. So those are two draft day stories for you. I got pretty long on that. That was a great question. I hope that's interesting. I'll start firing through some of the questions as we continue here. Today's show is brought to you in part by our friends over at Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross and in Logan. The Chevy trucks, well, there's just nothing like them, right? They're built in a different manner with the frame. They're just outstanding. You've got the Silverado and you've got the Colorado. And the Silverado comes with the 1500, the HD, the 3500 HD, the 35 chassis cam. Just an incredible lineup of trucks. And then the Colorado's the zippier truck out there if you're looking for a Chevy. Then, the SUV lineup of cars keeps getting better and better. The Trax, the Equinox, the Blazer, the Trailblazer, and then the Utah County assault vehicles, the Tahoe, and the Suburban, which are the standard of what Chevy has been about and everything. The electric car, the Bolt, has been getting rave reviews as well, so check it out. And obviously, you've got the Corvette. It is Murdoch Chevy, located in Woods Cross and in Logan. If you're going to head over, please email me first. We'll give you the Locked On Everydayer VIP treatment. We'd be excited to help you out. So please take a moment and join us for a nice little run over at Murdoch Chevy. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks, this is a great way to get involved, have some fun, enjoy yourself, and be a part of the game in a different manner with a little bit extra taking place over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks has got a bunch of different deals going on for you. The NBA Finals deal that is so good is about to come to an end, so make sure you jump aboard with that. First of all, you go to Prize Picks, download the app, make it a part of everything. You get it downloaded, and then you pick 2 to 5 players, or 2 to 6, and you can win up to 25% of your money. It's on any sport. You're not competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. This could end today. It is the NBA Finals. One Prize Picks user will have a chance to become a millionaire. One entry will picked after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected each day. Whoever placed this entry will be given a 6-pick flex with the following payouts: 6 correct picks for $1 million, 5 correct picks for $80,000, 4 correct picks, you get $16,000. Full details It can be found at prizepicks.com/1million. You must opt in at this link to be eligible. So go to prizepicks.com/1million, but first download the app and use the promo code Locked On, because then you get up to $100 free match. That's right. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks gives you $50. It's an instant match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On and sign up and download your PrizePicks app right now. All right, let's get back to your questions. Sorry for such a long-winded first answer. Thanks so much for making Locked On Jazz your first listen of the day. Second listen, probably NBA Big Board at this point. All right, let's do it. All right. Since Kobe Buffkin, you like Kobe Buffkin a lot, out of the Jazz current roster, could he be a rotation player in year one? So I doubt it, but maybe. I mean, it also depends on kind of where you are as a franchise, right? So if you as a franchise are going to say, and this is my whole thing that I think we could win 26 games. I heard Will Hardy, comment on Hoop Collective podcast that he's not looking to stretch this thing out. They're not looking to stretch this thing out for the sake of it. I 100% agree with Will. I do also think, as I've said multiple times, that you go get a good pick at 9, you go get a good pick at 16. There seems to me there's a real chance by game 40 this year that you're playing your 9th pick, your 16th pick, Ochai Agbaji, Walker Kessler, and Lauri Markkanen, and you could really lose a lot of games playing 4 guys that are in their first or second year in the NBA. And that's not like a criticism. I don't think most players in the NBA are entirely, if the way you ask the question is Kobe Buffkin can be a rotation player in year one? Like, yeah, he'll be a rotation player in the sense that if you've drafted him, you want him to develop, and so you're going to, end up having him be a rotation player 15 to 20 minutes a night, and then hopefully you're going to stretch him out and have him be a 30-minute a night player at some point, very similar to the way we did with Ochai this year. Maybe you're going to even throw him into the weeds a little faster. We don't really have a point guard, so if we draft a point guard, it's going to be hard to keep that point guard off the floor, frankly. I think, just because we don't have one. Talon is not a true point guard. Collins not a true point guard. Jordan's not a true point guard. So it will be interesting to see if we draft a point guard who's actually a true point guard. And Kobe Buffkin's questionable whether he's a true point guard. I do think it'll be a little tricky to see whether or not the Jazz can get that player off the floor. I saw you. This is our next question coming in. I saw your guy Kobe Buffkin will most likely be available at 16. My favorite mock draft is from CBS. I'm not the biggest fan of CBS's mock draft. They have Hendricks at 9, Whitehead at 16, Gigi Jackson at 28. Whitehead's just not going 16. I think Tariq Whitehead just had another surgery on his foot, which was expected, but he's not going 16. So I love this concept. This is a super interesting question. So Kobe, let's say for a second that the Jazz agree with me, which I have no idea. And the Jazz love Kobe Buffkin, or you have a player that you love. And like, if you look at the Ringer mock draft, Kobe Buffkin actually goes to the Jazz at 16. Anthony Black goes 9, Kobe Buffkin goes 16. And between 9 and 16 is interesting. Does Dallas draft a backup point guard to Luka? Maybe. Maybe. They don't have, they'd like to get the ball out of his hands, so they know Kyrie's coming back, then maybe not. Does Orlando draft a point guard? Probably not. Do the Thunder draft a point guard? Behind Shea and Giddey? Probably not. Does Toronto? Yes. Toronto with Fred VanVleet as a free agent, with Malachi Flynn having not fully come together. Do they? Yes. Does New Orleans draft a point guard? Possibly. Yes. A lot of high chance that New Orleans would at least be in the market for a point guard. Would Atlanta be in the market for a point guard? They have Trae Young. There's a lot of trade rumors there. They don't really have a backup. Yes, I would say. There's a possibility. So what's tricky if you're the Jazz, there's 3 teams picking before 16 that could go take that player. And I think that makes things kind of tricky of whether or not, you say most likely. Well, most likely, and you're wrong on most likely, you just missed your guy. So if the Jazz have a guy they really like, I think you just take him at 9. Trying to play a draft board 7 spots down the road is a pretty dangerous script. You better be right. So to the first question, do you know everybody else's draft board? Yes, and do you know if the Boston Celtics are trading up for Kelly Olynyk? Yes. I think that's, these are the really tricky things about the draft. And I think if you have a guy you like, it's tricky. This is the best question everyone's asking. What is the best case scenario for the Jazz on draft night? Well, the best case scenario for the Jazz on draft night is what I pull off in our NBA mock draft, which was totally crazy. I had an incredible day. I drafted Cason Wallace instead of Kobe Buffkin because I like Cason Wallace at the time better. So, I think the question for the Jazz is, and this gets to kind of some of the future questions as well, is there anything that happens in the night where they want to use any of their assets to go get something? So that's the first question, I think, when you're analyzing, what's the best case scenario for the Jazz. The second best case scenario is, I do think, if you, and who is it? If you have a player that you really like, I don't care if you get him at 9 or 16, no one's going to remember. If you have a player you like, go get them. So if there's someone the Jazz like, we won't know the best case scenario on the Jazz draft till about 2 or 3 years from now. We might have an idea, we definitely feel good about Ochai Agbaji and Walker Kessler, and there's still some major development on each of their ends before we really decide how great coup it was to get Cleveland and Minnesota's picks. But you have some time here before you figure out what it is you really, really, really success. So it's a hard question. I like Kobe Buffkin an awful lot. If we get Kobe Buffkin, I'm going to be super excited. Some people think Anthony Black is the next Marcus Smart. Well, if that's true and we draft Anthony Black, that's a massive success. I have had a hard time kind of visualizing how Anthony Black parlays to the NBA. That's just, but okay. But some people think he's Marcus Smart, right? That's super interesting. If, I don't know, if the French kid turns out you believe in him, you make that run and you get him at 9, and you get somebody else at 16. It's a little bit of, we don't know who the Jazz necessarily love the most. So if you can go get 2 or 3 players, the one thing I would say, if there's something the Jazz, is there a win if the Jazz get themselves back to a 2024 draft pick? Right now, we're sitting out the 2024 draft. So is there some way we use one of our picks to get into the 2024 draft? Is that a big win? The other one is a conversation we'll have later this week about mentality of what we're doing here. I think that's a tricky part of this too. Is I think myself included, we're all just, now, and I think the teams might be somewhere else. So we'll talk about that throughout the week. But good question. I like it. It's hard to answer though. Given the way the NBA is trending, bigger lead ball handlers, why would you draft a 6'2" guard like Cason Wallace in the top 10? So I really like a lot of aspects of Cason Wallace. And the measurement, he measures 6'4" and they measure 6'2" without shoes, if I remember correctly, which is a little smaller than the other guys, which I think, is absolutely 100% worth being concerned about. He's 6'4". The people love to compare him to Emmanuel Quickly. So he was 6'4" in all things, and he goes to the combine, and his combine result is 6'2" and a quarter without shoes. I don't know that that's that concerning to me. His wingspan 6'8" and a half. So I'm honestly, the measurement on Cason Wallace is not stunning to me. The 6'8" and a half, 6'4" with shoes, I don't think he's small. That's not, so no, that's not a problem for me. I like Cason Wallace. There's some times where I wish he was a little more aggressive. If we end up with Cason Wallace, I'm perfectly happy. Sure, I just kind of have said to everyone that Kobe Buffkin's the one guy I've watched. I was really I think there's a huge upside on that. We'll see. I'm not an expert at this. So no, I think this kind of narrative that Cason Wallace is too small because he measured at 6'2" and a half and without shoes. Last time I checked, he'll always play with shoes and his arms aren't going to shrink. So I'm not super worried about that. Would you be better use of assets to trade for an established all-star or trade up a draft pick and get a likely future all-star for a bit cheaper? All right, let's touch on this as we continue, because this, I think, is the most kind of biggest question about the way the Jazz approach their draft and what they're doing. And so I want to touch on this kind of coming up here in just as we kind of begin toward the last part of the show, because I do think this, maybe more than anything else, is the aspect of this draft that is hard for all of us and going to be kind of an ongoing conversation for Jazz fans. So I want to have that conversation with you as well. All right. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. This is a serious topic that, luckily is getting the attention, and we're just moving in such a better place with in society right now. And that is the idea of talking to someone, the idea of getting help, the idea of opening up and finding out why you do the things you do and learn how to improve yourself day to day. And that's where BetterHelp comes in. It's easy to get caught up in what everyone else needs from you. It's easy what everyone else thinks of you. It's easy to play the comparison game. It's also easy to have like little life demons that are back there that cause you to make reactions that when you think back, you're like, why did I do that? Why am I self-sabotaging? Why am I stressed out about this? What is the trigger that's causing this? So this is where therapy can come in to help you with your experiences and help you expand who you are and become better. BetterHelp is really cool. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try because it's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. You fill out a brief questionnaire, and then the thing I think is so important, you switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. So the question right before we went to break was, what do the Jazz do with their assets? And this is where I think what Justin and Danny and the flexibility they build is so important, but I also think so difficult. And that is like, how do you decide when you're using your assets? So if you go, like, let's say the latest Ringer mock draft has Amon Thompson dropping to 6 to Orlando. Well, let's say you really, really like Amon Thompson. Like you think at 6'6" with a 7-foot wingspan, some people thinking John Morant's athleticism, and you believe you're going to be able to turn him in to shooting, and you think he's amazing. And how many assets are you willing to use to go get him from Orlando at 6? And then really our assets are all draft picks. And the big question is there going to be a day coming up where a Luka or a somebody else is available? And you hate to use one too many right now when you suddenly need that later one when the big whale is available. Like if the big, huge golden diamond is available at some point in time and you used one extra to get up the draft and you suddenly can't get that deal done, that's a travesty. And that's the tricky thing here is like, you just can't use it because you're anxious and urgent and you're fan. You've got to use them at the right time, but you don't know what the right time is going to be. And you don't know necessarily what other opportunities are coming. So that's why I think this is like the best question is like, what do the Jazz do with their asset? Like it's only going to cost us one first round pick. We have 13. This one's not a pricey one. You better hope though, that when Luka suddenly announces he wants out of Dallas in 12 months and says, I want to come to Utah. Okay, probably not, but can you use those assets? On the other end, assets are a little bit like timeouts. They don't do you a lot of good if you don't ever use them. And at some point we have too many draft picks, so we've got to move them at some point in time. That to me is the most fascinating and I think most difficult and unanswerable question. Like I'd love to talk to Danny and Justin about it, but there's no real answer to that question because you don't know. So many of the moves the Jazz have in the past have been improved flexibility. You think they maintaining and improving flexibility will be a key motivator in the draft? And how will you affect what the Jazz does? I would phrase it a little slightly differently. I think the Jazz will try not to limit their flexibility. Like they've worked so hard to get flexibility. This is where you probably, unless it's for Victor, unless you really think Scoot's going to be a star, you're probably a little reluctant to give up multiple picks and take away the flexibility that you've done. From what you've seen, should we expect Markkanen's play to regress this upcoming season because surrounding cast will largely be young and unimproved, or does he have the ability to lead and elevate the rookie young guys? I mean, I think one of the questions when I keep talking about 26, 36, or 46 is maybe Lauri Markkanen's too good. Right? Maybe Lauri Markkanen's efficiency is so good you can't win 26 games, that you'll be 36 no matter what. Maybe Walker's defense is so good that you can't win 26, you'll win 36 no matter what. I don't think there'll be a regression out of Lauri. I think there were enough signs of what Lauri is and who he was and what he was doing as a player that I think that what we saw last year was real. I heard somebody caught him in the Instagram I saw on in Salt Lake City. Historically, how much money do teams typically have to absorb in order to get future first-round picks and a bad contract into cap space? And could the second apron penalties in the pending CBA make Utah's cap space even more valuable? So this is interesting. Like if you go back to those two draft rooms I was talking about, the Jazz, I think, trade $3 million to go get a first-round pick. It's now like $3 million to go get a second-round pick. Jazz traded cash. Now you're going to have to take a bad contract into your books to be able to get that. I think this is something the Jazz are going to be able to do on draft night. Brooklyn has 2 picks and they've got to get under the tax. Can you trade? Do you take Patty Mills or Joe Harris and move up to the 20th pick of the draft with that? There's another one in there. Somebody else late has some money issues on the draft board where I think the Jazz could move up from 28. And maybe you're giving them 28. I mean, we don't want 4 first-round picks, so you probably would give them 28, so then they save some face, but they also save some money on that. I'm looking. Brooklyn at 20. Houston at 20 might want to clear something out, but I doubt it. They're in pretty good shape. Golden State at 19 might want to clear something out, though they might need players. So there was Brooklyn at 21 and 22, not 20 and 21, 21 and 22. For example, in our NBA mock draft, that's actually what you'll see coming up. That's what I do, is I go and actually move us up to 21 to go take another player. It's interesting. We did that mock draft like a week ago, and then I fell in love with Kobe Buffkin. Interesting. Is there any truth to Chris Paul being waived by the Suns? Should the Jazz make an offer, and would he be a bad fit with the team? So there is truth to Chris Paul being waived. I think that from what I've been told by people who know more than I do, he will be waived and then likely stretched, and so then they cannot re-sign him in Phoenix. And so I do think that he will be waived and not part of the team next year. I don't think Utah's on his list of places to go. I think it's Clippers, LA, and maybe Philadelphia would be. His family's in LA, so he probably would prefer the 2 LA spots. Chris Paul and the Jazz. It's an interesting question. This gets into a little bit the whole question we've brought up a few times, which is Lauri Markkanen and Walker Kessler are so good and so cheap right now. The Jazz actually could, if they could find the right piece, could make like a 2-year run. And if they could get their contracts lined up correctly, they could make like a 2-year run. And then while Agbaji, Kessler, let's say Black and Buffkin develop, and then at the end of the 2-year run, your younger players are ready and you're doing the next generation. That would be the Chris Paul model if you're going to do that. Should the Jazz draft at 9 or trade back to get even more picks? I don't think the Jazz should trade back to get more picks. I do think it's interesting to see whether or not the Jazz do something to get into the 2024 draft. Into the 2024 draft. Because as of right now, if we finish outside the top 10, we don't have a pick. So that would be the question. All right. Tonight, the Nuggets, do they win the title? Do they get it done? That's good for us, right? If you're a Jazz fan and the Nuggets win, doesn't it give you belief you can win? All right. Great show. Thank you very much to Locked On. We'll watch some players today. We'll watch the NBA Finals today. We'll have it all for you tomorrow. John Hollinger did something about NBA free agents. We'll talk about that. And then more Draft Talk Wednesday and Thursday before Leaf takes over. Have a great one. Talk to you soon. Thanks very much.